Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on reletting costs. In this webinar, we'll be discussing the legislation relating to reletting costs from the 30th of September 2024 and providing you with some reletting cost examples. My name is Mark Fidlap, and today I'm also joined by Cassie Chow. We're part of the RTA's education team. Morning, Cassie.
Good morning, Mark, and hello, everybody. It's great to be here with you today.
Thanks very much, Cass. Before we start sharing some information with you all, the RTA respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians of this country and their continuing connection with the lands and seas on which we meet. We pay our respects to all traditional owners and elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, we understand that break leases do happen for various reasons, and when they do, a reletting cost may need to be paid by the tenant or a resident. An amendment to the Residential Tenancies and Rooming Accommodation Act of 2008 that started on the 30th of September 2024 specifies maximum amounts and the method for calculating reletting costs. These apply to tenancy agreements that were or are entered into from the 30th of September 2024. And later in this webinar, we'll discuss the legislation relating to agreements that were entered into before this date. The specific amount of the reletting costs that a tenant or resident is liable for depends on how much of the agreed tenancy term has expired when they vacated and whether the agreed term was less than or greater than 3 years. For agreements of 3 years or less, it's the lower, or we could say lesser, amount of the specified reletting costs for the percentage of the agreed fixed term that has expired, or rent until a new tenant or resident starts their tenancy agreement. It's important to note that it's not both, and it's not in addition to other costs such as advertising. For agreements over 3 years, the reletting cost is the lesser of either 1 month's rent for each 12-month period remaining of the term of the agreement, up to a maximum amount equal to 6 months' rent, or rent that would be payable until a new agreement begins after the premises are relet. And I reiterate again, it's not both. So let's look at the specified reletting costs for agreements up to 3 years based on the agreed term that has expired. You'll see on this slide that it starts from an amount equal to 4 weeks' rent if less than 25% of the agreed term has expired, and moves down through to the equivalent of 1 week's rent if more than 75% of the fixed term has expired. Now let's step through some examples to illustrate what the reletting cost would be in a couple of different scenarios. In this first example, we have a tenant on a 12-month agreement that started on the 1st of October 2024. The tenant breaks lease 2 months into the fixed term. The managing party finds a new tenant and their tenancy starts 1 week after the vacating tenant's agreement ends. Let's consider the reletting costs permitted under legislation. The first possibility is rent payable from the tenant's vacate date until a new agreement begins, which would be 1 week. The second possibility depends on the percentage of the fixed term that has expired, which in this case falls into the 25% or less category and is therefore an amount equal to 4 weeks' rent. Remembering that it's the lesser of the two amounts, not both, that means that the reletting cost in this example is equivalent of 1 week's rent. Cassie will now step you through a second example.
Thanks, Mark. So, everybody, let's consider this second example, which is on the slide here. We again have a 12-month agreement, but this time the tenant breaks lease 7 months into the fixed term. The managing party finds a new tenant whose agreement starts 3 weeks after the vacating tenant's one ends. In this example, the reletting cost is either 3 weeks' rent, as that would be the rent that's payable between the vacating tenant's agreement ending and the new tenant's agreement starting, or since 50% up to less than 75% of the agreed fixed term has expired, an amount equivalent to 2 weeks' rent. So in this case, the reletting cost would be 2 weeks' rent because it's the lower of the two possible amounts under legislation. For the managing parties out there, it is important to be aware that the requirement to mitigate, or in other words, minimize, the tenant's financial loss is still applicable, and you do need to act reasonably in finding a new tenant to move into the property as early as possible. To help our customers, the RTA has produced an online calculator to assist in working out the amount of weeks that have expired at the time a tenancy ends. I'd like to emphasize that the calculator is not going to do a dollar amount, but instead it helps with calculating the remaining term based on the information that you provide. It's up to parties in the tenancy to follow the legislation and thereby calculate the reletting cost. Remember, it's the lesser amount. When an agreement is ended early without grounds, it's the rent that would be payable until a new tenancy starts, or the calculated reletting cost based on how much of the fixed term has expired when the tenant vacated. Before we finish up today, we wanted to highlight that there is a transitional period for agreements entered into before 30th of September 2024. And the legislation states if the agreement includes a term about reasonable costs for breaking a lease, then it can continue for that agreement, as this aligns with legislation that was in effect before 30th of September 2024. New or renewal agreements from the 30th of September 2024 onwards will be calculated based on the reletting cost legislation that we've discussed in earlier slides today. The RTA has plenty of resources available on our website to help you navigate and understand reletting costs, changes due to tenancy laws that have occurred over time, and other matters relating to your tenancy. This includes frequently asked questions, fact sheets, and short videos. We encourage you to visit the website as your first point of call for tenancy law information. In addition to our website, the RTA provides information through various channels, such as YouTube videos, podcasts, and our e-newsletter. You can also follow us on LinkedIn. For information relating to your own individual situation, you can also call our contact centre and one of our friendly staff will assist you with your tenancy or bond related queries. You can reach the contact centre by dialing 1300 366 311 between 8:30 a.m. and 5 p.m. on weekdays. Thank you, Mark, for joining me today.
No worries at all, Cass.
And thanks to you all for watching. We hope to see you at one of our upcoming webinars or in-person information sessions across Queensland. This webinar will now end.